Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Phase 1 Child Care Guidance. Before we get started, I would like to go over a few items so you know how to participate in today's event. When you join today's webinar, you selected to either join by phone call or computer audio. If for any reason you would like to change your selection, you can do so by accessing your audio pane in your control panel. This webinar is being recorded and all participants are placed on mute for quality assurance. You will have the opportunity to submit text questions to today's presenters by typing your questions into the questions pane of the control panel. You may send in your questions at any time and we'll collect these and address them during the Q&A sessions throughout and at the end of today's presentation. And with that said, I would now like to turn it over to Kathy Glazer.
Thanks, Val. This is Kathy Glazer with the Virginia Early Childhood Foundation. Welcome to everybody for today's broadcast. We're really glad to have a chance to make it possible for you all to hear from a couple of our state leaders about guidance for childcare for Phase 1 and be part of conversations thinking about and shaping what Phase 2 may look like. I know that Tara and Jenna appreciate hearing from you, your questions and your thoughts and suggestions. So please use the question box liberally to put your comments and questions throughout the event. And now I'd like to turn it to Jenna Conway, who's the Chief School Readiness Officer for Virginia, and Tara Ragland, who is the Director of Licensing Programs for the Virginia Department of Social Services. Welcome, Jenna and Tara.
Wonderful. Thank you, Kathy. Thank you, Valerie. Good morning, everybody. I'm Jenna Conway. I'm our Chief School Readiness Officer and very pleased to be here with my colleague, Tara, to give you a sense of where we are as a Commonwealth 10 weeks into this pandemic. We go to the next slide, please. Wanted to start off by thanking and appreciating everybody who's joined us this morning. I know it has been a rocky road over the course of the last 2.5 months, and just wanted to take a moment to appreciate your resilience. For those of you who've remained open, have really been beacons of light for the families that you serve, whether in a family day home or childcare or other setting. For those of you who've been closed, I know you've been scrambling behind the scenes to continue to reach out to your families, to apply for the range of federal and state benefits, tracking documents, submitting materials, all the while hoping that you'll be able to return to some normalcy for your teachers, for your families, and most importantly, for the young children you serve. And so just wanted to, on behalf of Tara, the other state leaders we represent, the governor, First Lady, again, express our appreciation. This gets harder as this goes on. And so we know that your resilience is what is keeping you running, and that's just so important for young children and families in the Commonwealth. What we'd like to do this morning is give you an update on the current situation, just be transparent with you about what we know about the state of early childhood in the Commonwealth. Talk briefly about Phase 1 in Virginia. So many of you have been listening in on the governor's thrice weekly updates, but just give you kind of a high level what it means for us to move into Phase 1 in most Virginia communities, not all. We'll talk about that in a second. Talk a little bit about tracking childcare capacity as we reopen, and so how we want to work in partnership with you, with your families and with communities to make sure we can have enough supply to meet the demand and enough demand to meet the supply. And then we'll get into the details about the CARES Act funding, as well as have Tara talk through where we are on the incentive program and how many programs have been approved, what it takes to apply and be approved, and then get into the details of the Phase 1 guidance that became live for most communities on Friday. And then lastly, I'll wrap us up with preparing for Phase 2. And so we don't know when that will be, right? We're using the scientific data to determine when we move from one phase to the other, but at least be forward thinking and walk you through how we're thinking about getting ready for the next phase of recovery. Next slide, please. So the current situation in the Commonwealth, and again, wanting to be transparent about where we are, we still have the vast majority of our early childhood programs. Our schools, as you know, continue to be closed, including all preschool. All of our Head Starts are closed right now, and roughly 62% of our child day centers are closed. Similar numbers for our religious exempt preschools. Most of our family day homes are open, so only about one in five are closed right now. And so again, that's sort of increased slightly over the last week or so. We, across the state, this means we're missing about 200,000 slots from the child care system. This is down from our kind of all-time high, which is roughly about 210,000. So we're glad to see folks coming back. And in fact, Tara and the team are tracking folks as they come back on. We have just over 300, about 330 programs as of 2 days ago. I think 340 programs as of today. So step by step, day by day, more programs are indicating to licensing that they have a reopening date. So it doesn't necessarily mean these are all reopened, but we know folks are saying I'll be open after Memorial Day, I'll be open June 1st, but kind of bit by bit, more and more programs are coming back online in addition to those that have remained open. In phase one, childcare is allowed to be open, and we continue to treat our childcare educators and leaders as essential personnel. And in fact, for those of you who've talked about this before, but if you aren't familiar with it, there is a letter for the field indicating that you are essential, that you should continue to be a priority for critical supplies, whether that's personal protective equipment, food stuff, cleaning, whatever it is. So again, that is on the DSS website that I believe is listed in the chat function, and we'll have help for you later as well. And as it relates to our current priority areas, we've shifted slightly. So if you've listened to one of our prior sessions, we talked about making sure that there was enough childcare for essential personnel. When we were in phase 0, or in the kind of most immediate days of the crisis, our focus really was on prioritizing essential personnel. We are now shifting, and so if you looked at the governor's guidance and other materials that came out middle to end of last week, we're now shifting from just prioritizing essential personnel to making sure that there's enough childcare as all types of personnel return to work. And so we know this is important, and as you're working with your families, as communities and economies are recovering, that there might be folks who work for non-essential retail whose employers are calling them and saying, you need to come in, you need to return to work. And so those families need childcare, those kids need childcare. So again, we have shifted priorities. There's no limit now or kind of expectation that you are only serving essential personnel. Now we are saying we want to make sure that there's enough childcare in the Commonwealth as all types of personnel return to work. We also are continuing to look at how we use the $70 million in the CARES Act child care funding, as well as other federal resources as they become available to support the field. Really important. And so today's webinar is a mix of both information about the funding available, where we are on that, as well as the phase 1 guidance, because we know that you are operating, even as you come back online, in a very different financial context. And so really trying to be as thoughtful as we can and make sure any dollar we get a hold of at the state level, we are getting out to you and supporting you as you are remaining open or planning to reopen. One important caveat, and I say this not to shirk any of our responsibility as a state, but just I think it's important to note this. When we look at 10 weeks of this, 200,000 plus slots that we haven't received revenue or there's been a loss in capacity of over the course of that 10 weeks, the financial losses experienced by the Commonwealth, experienced by the folks on the phone, experienced by your colleagues across the state, far exceed the new federal funding available. So some of you might I don't want anybody to kind of feel crazy. We're like, wow, I still feel like I've had a lot of financial losses. I'm still scrambling to get by. There's this money coming out of DC, but the money coming out of DC, the money available and the kind of the state resources to support folks is far less than the financial losses experienced by everybody on this phone call. I just think it's important to acknowledge that, as we kind of this goes on, and we know it's incredibly stressful. And again, just as an admiration of your resilience, your persistence, your creativity, and kind of keeping things sort of cobbled together. But we know that's stressful, we know that's difficult, and we are here, we hear that from you. Next slide, please. So what does it mean to move into phase 1? Because we might say, well, Jenna, it seems like the numbers you just presented, other than that slight increase in folks who say they've got a reopening date, looks pretty similar to where we've been for the last 10 weeks, right? We've been at sort of 60% plus closed for several weeks now, right? We know our family day homes have stayed open, have done an incredible job serving families in those smaller settings. well, what's different in phase one? So I think it's important to speak more broadly about phase one before we go into the details of childcare guidance. So on Friday, with the exception of Northern Virginia, Richmond, and Accomack, Virginia moved to phase one, which means that sort of for some folks, they're still safer at home, particularly if you're in a vulnerable population, still kind of no social gatherings of more than 10 individuals, still encouraging social distancing and teleworking where possible, but they have revised the business limitations. And so, and if you kind of go to the link at the bottom of this page, you'll see that, but basically allowing folks, as you'll see in that chart, to start to reopen. Places of worship, personal grooming, private campgrounds, sort of some of our other sort of settings, just kind of a whole several pages of lists, restaurants, non-essential retail, really encouraging folks at much lower capacities to come back. What that means, and you all know this very well, right? What that means is that more folks will get the phone call in the next few weeks saying, hey, we need you back, right? Obviously, you can't socially distance or sort of telework if you're a barber or a hair cutter or work. And so now you're going to get that call and need to come back. And if you've got small kids, it means you need childcare. And so really kind of, with the, some places are opened as of Friday, some places are opening this week, but kind of gradually we expect in phase one, more and more places will be open on a smaller scale with social distancing, often with masks and a lot of precautions, but we will have fewer people who will be unemployed or teleworking right now, and more people who will need to go to work, which means that they will need childcare or someplace healthy and safe to send their kids. Next slide, please. One of the questions we've gotten as Virginia prepared to go to phase one was, well, how will we balance and make sure that we have enough childcare to support these individual businesses as they open their doors back again, call employees back? And so just wanted to remind everybody of our partnership with Childcare Aware Virginia. They run the Hotline for Families, 866 Kids TLC. They also have for providers and for communities, for chambers of commerce, for everybody. They keep this map up to date of what's available. It's a really important, as I know that you all are saying, hey, I'm ready to open up, but I sent a survey or I called my families and they're not ready to come back yet, right? And we continue to hear this across the state where we know we have a lot less centers open, we have a lot fewer slots. On the other hand, maybe families haven't gotten that call yet to return, maybe the family member is still unemployed. We know that there's kind of this challenge around matching the slots to the kids, getting the kids out of the homes and back into the centers. And so just wanted to remind you that we have this map, that we're working with communities to track this, right, so that we make sure we've got enough capacity, right, that folks are aware of you, and to ask if your information isn't up to date on this issue. Everybody after the call today should go to this link, click on it, and make sure, or call 866 Kids TLC and make sure that your site, your capacity, all the details are up to date, your phone number, all those things, because this will be the resource that we'll be sharing with hospital systems, with mayors and board of supervisors, with our Smart Beginnings partners as we come back online. And if you've got availability, you're open and you don't have enough kids right now, really important that your information in this map is up to date. We should also note that our partners at Childcare Aware have also been tracking if there's any areas in the state where, for example, they're getting more phone calls or clicks or emails from parents, then there's capacity available. And we're not hearing that. And we know when we talk to you all, when we talk to Childcare Aware, there's still a phenomenon. We're open, we're serving fewer kids, but the parents aren't interested in coming back yet. And so we will continue to work with Childcare Aware if they become hotspots, right, where there are places where there are far more parents reaching out for care than there's availability. We can kind of work with that community, with the providers, bring folks back online. And so just so important that you're aware of this resource and that you let us know when you're reopening so that we can make sure that we can refer parents to you if in need. Next slide, please. I'm going to present high-level kind of CARES Act and the funding available, kind of what's going out now, and then I'm going to turn it over to Tara, who's going to walk you through where we are with the incentive program, which is the single biggest source of funding here. But just as a quick reminder before turning it over to Tara, We did receive $70 million that goes directly for childcare. We came to you roughly about a month ago and said, here are the ways in which we're going to use those dollars. Our top priority was getting resources to all programs who are open to serve children, so moving away from just subsidy providers, but all providers who were open to serve children during the pandemic, because we know that you needed to provide hero pay to your staff. We know you had higher operating costs as it relates to lower group sizes and additional cleaning and personal protective supplies. And so that's the top priority. And Tara will talk through that in a minute in terms of really providing a new direct cash assistance program to you. We've also been monitoring and trying to preserve our subsidy program, so supporting our families on that by eliminating copays for a 3-month period, and sort of providing absence payments to not only our open childcare subsidy programs, but those that had to temporarily close. So really making sure we have enough providers so that our low-income and vulnerable families can have access to care now if they need it, if they get that call to return to work, and as we recover from the pandemic. And then lastly, we put aside some money for backup emergency childcare in schools. But what we're finding is that there really is enough capacity. There are enough open programs in the private market, thanks to Family Day Homes staying open, thanks to efforts of folks on the phone, those 40% of our programs that are staying open. And so we haven't really needed to use childcare in the schools, but instead through Childcare Aware and through partners are really making sure that we're sending kids to the experts. And still we're hearing that there are empty classrooms, as we know that there's concerns, families are afraid, or families' financial circumstances have changed. And so we've always got this backup if needed, but the reality is the vast majority of our families are seeking care through our experts, through our Family Day Homes and our childcare programs that remain open. So with that, that's an update on where we are as the state. Still a lot of closed programs, although we're seeing hints of reopening, which is really exciting to see. We're moving into phase 1, and so we should see an uptick in terms of our economy and more families getting that call, needing to return to work. We no longer need to prioritize essential personnel. Anybody who's working, anybody who needs care right now can come to your program. And we are in the process of getting some of these federal dollars out to you to support you that are open or who are planning to open. So with that, let me turn it over to Tara, who will give you an update on where we are as it relates to the CARES grant incentive. Next slide, please.
Thank you so much, Jenna. So an update about the CARES Act funding. As most of you know, Virginia has launched a new directive cash incentive program, which is the CARES grant incentive, to support all open programs. The CARES grant incentive program for child care providers is a 3-month-long grant. It goes April through June, and grants are provided to support child care programs who remain open and are willing to serve essential children of essential personnel. Eligible programs include licensed child day centers, licensed family day homes, voluntary registered homes, religious exempt centers, subsidy programs, and homes approved through local ordinance in Northern Virginia. So after the first month, it's kind of exciting, Virginia has approved 1,770 providers for participation in the CARES grant incentive program. The average monthly award has been around $4,200, so that's pretty significant, and I think it's pretty exciting that we've been able to, kind of see what those numbers look like. Each grant recipient will now receive one payment for all 3 months of operation, as indicated by your application. If you had checked all 3 months, then you'll get all 3 months. If you started operating in May, then you would get May and June. So part of that was to hopefully, our hope in doing the 3-month check is to maybe soften the blow that the checks didn't go out on May 15th like we had discussed previously. Obviously, we initially hoped that the checks would go out by the 15th, and this has not happened. So the delay is just something we couldn't have anticipated. And our Division of Finance continues to diligently work to ensure that the payments are processed accurately and as efficiently as possible. So we hope that those will start going out I don't really want to give a time because they, some of the issues that they've run up against have just been really matching some things with IRS and our system, and just some things that we just had no knowledge that would be, an issue for us. So we continue to just ask for your patience, and hopefully knowing that you're going to get, one check for all 3 months will kind of help offset that a little bit. Next slide, please. So phase 1 guidance. Again, as many of you know, on May 14th, the Department of Social Services issued guidance for child care and camps in preparation for phase 1. And we've received just a lot of questions, and continue to speak with a lot of folks in the field just about, what phase 1 guidance means to them. And so in a nutshell, what this means is that we're going to continue social distancing and limiting the groups to 10, including staff. We know that this has been problematic, and that there's been a lot of you guys who have called in and have, that have sent in information asking if that could be increased. And we'll talk a little bit about that maybe as we go into phase 2. But that's I know that there was a question in the chat box regarding the 10, and want to make that clear that that is not DSS guidance. That's guidance that has come down from the governor in terms of the social distancing and the groups of 10. So we hope that maybe as we move into phase 2 that we can look at lessening that, and maybe that will help some of the burden. Also, we continue to prohibit the use of community, or will prohibit the use of community swimming pools and water play activities, discouraging field trips, intergroup events, and extracurricular activities. I'm going to continue to require increased infection control procedures such as hand washing, cleaning and sanitizing, and health checks. And I know one of the other questions that was in the chat box was related to where can we get different things for sanitizing and cleaning. And I know that there's several efforts out there in order to kind of connect people with those resources. And actually, Child Care Aware is a good place to kind of turn to as well, because they're working with folks on how to get some of those supplies with, I believe, Kaplan or somebody like that they're working with. So we hope to see some of those resources get in the hands of our providers real soon. We're going to continue the use of personal protective equipment when feasible for staff members and children over the age of 2. And we're going to continue to follow our local health department guidelines, Virginia Department of Health guidelines, and the CDC guidelines for opening and or reopening in response to the positive cases or symptoms of COVID-19. Next slide. And I'll turn it back over to Jenna to discuss the preparation for phase 2.
Thank you, Tara. Very exciting to hear. I know there's been a couple of bumps, so very exciting to hear how many folks have been approved and are open, and I know sort of need those resources to support them. Huge thanks to Social Services for standing up that brand new program and working so hard to work to get those resources out. And then, in terms of the phase 1 guidance, which in a lot of ways looks fairly similar to what our open programs have been doing, we just wanted to reemphasize the expectations. I saw in the chat a question and just want to note this again. The big shift from phase 0 to phase 1 as it relates to open childcare is you no longer need to prioritize essential personnel. And so I just want to note this. I know that this has been a bunch of questions: who's essential, who's not essential. We are moving away from the need to just prioritize essential personnel. And so we need to keep the rule of 10 in order to keep our employers, keep our educators, keep our families, and keep our kids safe. But you no longer need to limit your child care programs to essential personnel. And anybody who's returning to work, regardless of their employer, should be eligible. We're just asking folks to support all families as they return to work, or even if they're returning to look for work. We're kind of shifting away from that. As Tara noted, we still ask for purposes of the grant if you are willing to serve essential personnel. And so again, that's willing. That's not requiring you to serve essential personnel. It just means that you're willing to serve essential personnel. But as we get into phase one, we do think it's important that we communicate clearly to everyone. We've changed the governor's language in the slides and the press conferences he's put out to say the most important thing is it's for working personnel, folks who are trained to work or looking for work. It is no longer limited to kids of essential personnel. Really, really important as we help to bring back the economy, but do that in a way that's safe for educators, safe for you all, safe for families, and safe for the kids we serve. So Tara just walked us through phase one. The link is in the chat box or on the DSS website. Again, CDC guidance, the Department of Social Services guidance, kind of take a moment. It's a couple of pages, so take a look at it, share it with your staff. One of the things when I've talked to open programs, I think, is folks helping staff recognize this is a new reality. If you've been open, not a lot of differences. So you'll notice that if you are opening now, I think it's really important to take that time with your staff, maybe sending this to them in advance on their phones before they come in, maybe spending some time those first days that they're back, walking them through this. I know that I've heard that there's a lot of fear also out there in terms of educators. And so one of the things from places that have been open throughout this that they've said has worked really well for them is really spending time with staff, walking them through the guidance, helping them get good at these new practices, right? Making sure they're comfortable in the masks, right? Sort of, recognizing and kind of encouraging these behaviors, spending a little time each morning as folks come in, familiarizing them with all these guidance and materials is really important. That kind of frequent communication, reassurance, following rules and protocols right now can be really helpful and kind of keeping all of us feeling safe and secure. We also are working to prepare for phase two. So as a reminder, and I'm not a public health expert, folks like Tara and myself are deferring or listening really closely to our colleagues at the Virginia Department of Health, but we are working with them right now to prepare for what's next. There's not a specific date and time. You might have heard June 10th. You might have heard June 1st. You might have heard, another date. There is not a set date. We don't move to phases simply based on the calendar. We move from one phase to another based on a recommendation from the Department of Health, and they're basing that on the data. So the testing data, the tracing data, the new cases data, all of that data is what is used to determine whether or not we use for phase two. So phase two could be in 2 weeks, phase two could be in 4 weeks, phase two could be in 6 weeks. I understand that that's frustrating, right? I think it's frustrating for all of this uncertainty and unknown, but I want folks to understand that we just can't, it wouldn't be safe for families, for you all, for your teachers, if we tried to sort of artificially say, well, we're just going to be there by June 15th. We just don't know. We're using the data as we go, and we want to be kind of as safe as possible and defer to the public health experts, defer to the doctors, right? Defer to the folks who are on the front lines of the COVID pandemic to help make these decisions. So we're in phase one right now, everywhere except for Richmond, Accomack, and Northern Virginia. Richmond, Accomack, and Northern Virginia are still officially in phase 0, and they are preparing, ideally within a week or two, to move into phase 1. Depending on how well Virginia does in phase 1, anywhere from 2 to potentially 6 weeks, we might come across phase 2. At that point, we need to put out new guidance for you on how do we support the next phase of reopening. As Tara noted, we're hearing directly from you. If all of these businesses open, I can't serve all the parents I need to serve with the rule of 10, right? I don't have enough physical rooms. I need more capacity. And so we know that that's coming, and we are preparing. We still want to keep you safe, keep your teachers safe, and keep kids safe. So we're in those conversations right now. The Department of Health is in conversations with CDC and getting that guidance. And then we are also working with several task force, right? We're looking at reopening guidelines for schools, for childcare, for camps, and making sure that we kind of reflect all of the unique stakeholders and unique Virginia communities. We are setting up a small number of listening sessions to hear from childcare and camp stakeholders on kind of, those who've been open, what they've done to keep kids and teachers safe, what their cost impact is, sort of just some practical guidance on what it takes to do this. And that will help us inform our phase 2 guidance. We've done the same with barbershops and with small businesses, with restaurants and cafes, right? Kind of trying to work with our private businesses across the Commonwealth to understand, okay, what could you do to keep folks safe? What practices could you put in place? How do we use our imagination, right? How do we sort of think creatively about this balancing act between keeping folks safe, but also know that, parents of kids need a safe and healthy place to send their kids if they want to return to work. And so we'll have some of these listening sessions, again, really focused on childcare, camps, private providers, making sure we have private providers at the table as we are shaping this guidance to go to the governor. I will note that this group will not be able to set the rules. All of this has to go through the governor or through the public health experts. Ultimately have the last word, as they are experts in health, but wanting to get recommendations from providers to inform those recommendations. And we will also have the public health officials in. So our hope is to do that work over the course of the next 2 weeks to hear from folks. As some of you might have seen, there are also task force out there. I sit on the education task force, making sure that early childhood is well represented as we think about everything from our infants and toddlers through to our college kids, right? And recognize that there's going to be some differences across those settings, and how do we, support opening where safe. There are other groups, and then we're also conducting these listening sessions. So again, trying to make sure that childcare is at the table as we prepare for phase 2. What you should expect is more guidance and potentially future webinars as we get closer to phase 2. Once the data suggests that we are closer, we will again put out additional guidance. I think you will see more changes between phase 1 and phase 2 than you did between phase 0 and phase 1, as we recognize and are hearing from you that with our current rules, it will be very difficult to kind of serve the capacity that we need to do. And so really trying to kind of work with our providers to think differently, creatively, what we can do to keep our educators, our families, and our kids safe, while also assuring that we have enough childcare capacity so that families can return to work, pursue self-sufficiency, and our economy more broadly can recover. So with that, Tara and I wanted to open it up to questions. I think we can look at the question box here. I'm not sure, Tara, if you've taken a look at it or we want to kind of start going through these.
Yeah, one of the questions ask, are children age 2 and above, do they need to wear masks? That's a difficult ask, I know, but I think it's where feasible. I can't imagine a 2-year-old, or it's going to be interesting to try to keep that on, but I think that's somewhat of the expectation. Jenna, what would your answer be to that? I think that's some of the challenges our providers are facing.
Yeah, I think in what we've done for the phase 1 guidance, and is to put the best possible guidance out there. I think, particularly you all are at the forefront of balancing between, how do you support kids during this incredibly difficult time, right? Where the world has been turned upside down, kids are scared, kids are anxious with all of the shifts in routines. It's a really, really tough time, right? And I know in my own household, right, sort of the fight about wearing the mask is about way more than wearing the mask, right? It's about all of the emotional turmoil that's going on for my 2-year-old or 4-year-old or 6-year-old. And so I think we're encouraging it. I think the more that we can normalize and practice, the better, right? I think it helps keep, I think the more that you see in the picture even here, right, the adult is wearing the mask, the kid is not, but I think ideally we get to a place where, particularly where kids are in close contact with each other indoors, that they're wearing masks. On the other hand, as you've heard Tara talk about before, the last thing a provider or a family or kid needs right now is some highly punitive response, right? Where we're sort of citing you or yelling at you or sort of saying you have to wear that mask, or we put you in that position where you're fighting with a kid over wearing a mask. So we ask you to use your best guidance. We know that you understand your kids. We know that you are there for your kids and have to be there for them emotionally, right? In addition to the kind of the health and safety concerns. And so we encourage you to get kids in the habit, your older kids in the habit of wearing them, where, they can't keep the 6 feet, thinking about how to kind of encourage that, make it fun, make it less scary. But we're not going to be punitive about, some of these recommendations, because that would be terrible for you, terrible for your families, and terrible for kids.
Okay, Jenna, there was another question. If we did not reopen because there was not a demand, but are willing to open, would we still qualify for the CARES grant? So I would say yes. We're getting toward the end. We're past the middle of the month for May, so you would still have some eligibility for June, and we could definitely look at the payment for June. So I would encourage you to continue to apply at this point. I know there was another question, and I think we answered it, but just wanted to clarify about the pool. In phase 1, there's really no use of pools, I think, for childcare, especially. And another question, Jenna, and this may be for you. What can we do to get the governor to realize he is asking us to let our children return, but he is limiting us in our ability to have our children return? Sorry, I was trying to read that.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And I think, again, this is why we wanted to include the slide and talk a little bit about preparing for phase 2, as well as to walk through the time parameters or how long we think this will last. We know you can't keep this up much longer. And so again, we want to be very thoughtful, right? We can't commit to sort of a date on which this will end, but we recognize that as you open back up the economy, that puts more pressure on you all, and so we are already preparing for the next phase and are hearing from those folks who have been open, whose families are largely based on seeing other families go and sort of seeing that it was safe and knowing that that there is a real value in kind of kids getting back into your programs, back into your classrooms, that pressure only increases. And so we are hearing that, we are balancing that with the public health information that we're getting about kind of the potential impact on kids, and preparing for phase 2, because we know that this can't be carried on much longer in terms of the kind of limits on your capacity that come from the rule of 10. We're also hearing that from businesses across the state, right? A lot of businesses are limited a lot, and they're kind of how many people let in, and they're very nervous around how do I make ends meet if you limit my capacity. So this is not a sustainable phase. You couldn't stay in phase 1 for an extended period of time, right? Because it's it doesn't work for folks. And so we are working very closely with a handful of stakeholders, with our public health experts to get ready for phase 2. On the flip side, somebody I noted, Tara just asked the question about, look at some of the information coming out around the kind of immune system responses of kids, some of the kind of the cases of sort of kids being affected by COVID. And I think this continues to represent, a balancing act in terms of how do we open safely, right? We have to keep our kids, our families, and our educators safe. And, we also know that there are real consequences to kind of our economy and our society being shut down, right? And so the phased in approach is taking in that data, the new data is coming in about kid safety, the data about how effective our programs have been over the last 10 weeks. So those folks that have been open have done a really good job of keeping their educators safe, keeping their kids safe, right? And so it's this balancing act between kind of recovery and health and safety that, is at the forefront of how the governor decides for each phase.
So Jenna and Tara, I'm noticing that the questions are kind of in several categories, and I'm going to suggest if it works for y'all that first we tackle, there's still a few that really relate to the CARES grants and accessing and tapping into those. There are a bunch that are sort of asking questions about thinking about and conceptualizing, going from phase 1 to phase 2 and how do we, kind of make sense of that. And then there are a bunch that are about, details about wearing masks or physical distancing or pools that I think we could probably tackle in a group. If that sounds fair to you, let me just kind of start with identifying some of the grant questions. I think we still have some folks who are wondering about when the check might be received. Do y'all want to, that there maybe got notice that the checks would be delayed? Do y'all want to address first when they might expect those programs that applied for and were approved for May? When might they expect, or April, when might their checks arrive?
So when I was speaking earlier, Kathy, one of the things that I didn't want to kind of, put ourselves in a situation where we were having to send out more information because we didn't get the checks out by another, set date. We really anticipate it being very soon. Again, some of the issues that we ran into really related to finance and just being able to match up certain numbers and things like that. So again, we're just kind of asking for patience on that and don't really want to give a definitive date, but we really hope to have it out by the end of the month at the latest. Some of the issues have even been some connectivity issues that have really slowed things down, and when people are working from home and that type of thing, it makes it for a bit of a different experience for a lot of our staff. So, and again, that's one of the reasons why we decided to try to figure out if we could just go ahead and cut one check for folks that had applied in April, and we're going to be open from April to June. So that would help, hopefully offset some of the costs that they are incurring. The other piece to the CARES question is were there any paperwork requirements, and that is I think that that was put in the chat in terms of where you can go to get that information on the DSS website, and I believe I saw that there. Yep, it's still there. It's in the chat box if you want to go there. It's the DSS website.
Terrific. And just a reminder, folks, for Tara, for folks who are wondering how will they know if they're approved, how would they be notified, what should their expectations be?
So I'm hoping that most folks received an email on the delay regarding the May 15th date. We said we would try to keep you updated. I would say that if you haven't heard from us, that's probably a good thing, unless if you got that email, that means we've received some type of information from you and you are on our list and that you are in our database. So that is a very good thing if you received an email from us. The other piece of that is there will be approval letters that will go out. So as finance starts to move through all the information, so licensing sent everything over to our finance department, and so everything's out of the hands of licensing right now in terms of processing, and so now it's just finance batching those payments and trying to get those processed. So as those start to come out of finance and the approvals come from that area, you will have acceptance letters that will be going out. So we really anticipate that happening soon. So and there is a good chance that if you haven't heard from us, that's good news. So folks who had significant issues or problems with their application, we contacted either via email or followed up with a phone call. So I think a lot of that was rectified. So most folks that had issues were contacted. So I think hopefully that'll answer your questions.
Thanks, Tara. And also folks are wondering about, I think you covered this, but just, checking again, how can providers communicate to families that they're opening up for all families, but that they have, more limited number of slots due to the mandate of up to 10? So, maybe just talk again about what Child Care Aware and access to that, to that information can do for providers, and if there are other ways that they can communicate to families about their vacancies, as well as about the health and safety regulations that make some limitations for those programs.
So Child Care Aware has been essential in this process for both providers and I think for a lot of us, at the state level. They are able to match folks up. So they receive a lot of calls on a daily basis in terms of people who, families who are in need of childcare. And so Child Care Aware will take that information and match it up and help folks find the needed resources in their area for childcare. So I think it's essential that if there's any changes that you make, if you decide that you are reopening or you're deciding to make more, have more space for kids, that you just communicate with Child Care Aware. And again, I believe that is in the chat box as well. I don't want to give the wrong information by saying it off the top of my head. So I'll try to locate that as well. But as I'm looking through.
Yeah, and then Kathy, while Tara's looking it up, I would also add, I think part of our reason for publishing the updated guidance, for having the governor, as he did on Friday and other days last week, talk about childcare is we're trying to help providers work with families during this phase 1 period. I know just as a citizen of the Commonwealth right now, it's confusing, the phases and what the phases mean and what we can and can't do, right? And how much of it, is changed, one day to the next. I do think we've heard from providers around, reaching out to families is important, whether it's a call, a text, or an email, right? Even if it's just to share, hey, this came down from the state, you can share this with families. I know that folks have done very simple surveys with families, right? Whether it's just have somebody call and say, what's going on? Would you be interested? Getting different dates, right? If you're sort of to feel out your programs. In doing that, I think it's helpful to understand, right? And to, in some ways to blame the state, to say, we have these limits that are set upon us, like all other businesses in the Commonwealth. And so, but it's temporary, right? And that we'll, with phase 2, we'll have some changes. But I do, what we've heard has worked best is, sharing the state guidance, which basically makes it clear it's not you who's limiting the size, it's us, and helps parents feel more secure, right? That like, okay, you guys are looking to sort of state and national health experts and setting this guidance, and hearing from families on when they think they're likely to return. Because I think I've been struck by most of the providers who've actually done that outreach to their families are hearing different things from different families. And it's been very helpful to get that information as they think about reopening.
Thanks, Jenna. I think those are the bulk of the questions related to the CARES grants. We do
Kathy,
have
just real quick, I wanted to, it's vachildcare.com for Child Care Aware. I just wanted to throw that out there because it is in the chat box, one of the first things I think that comes up. I just wanted to make sure we put that out there.
Perfect, thank you. Lots of questions related to water play and guidelines about, safety and regulations around water play pools. Do you all want to try to address that or guide folks to where they might get some answers to their questions?
Well, I think in phase 1, we're pretty much saying that we there's not really any water sports that can be done at this point, at least in a pool, and so that's kind of a little bit of a restriction. Jenna, do you have any comments on that?
No, I think that's clear. I mean, the only flexibility at all in phase 1 is outdoor pools for lap swimming, right? And so really, even though I know it's sometimes conflicting what you might have seen on the news, right? Folks are supposed to be, if you're in sort of a body of water, it's really supposed to be for exercise, not for recreation, and with all of the social distancing. So in light of that, the guidance for phase 1 is that there shouldn't be pool time or, kind of water play activities. There's some evidence that chlorine kills the virus. I think when you imagine the set of water play activities that small kids are engaging in, it's just, it just tends to be kids in close proximity to each other. There's just not great evidence that we can kind of keep kids safe in doing that right now. And so to be careful, I think, there's the prohibition on it for phase 1. I think it's something, right? I mean, assuming phase 2 hits sometime in June, we'll be in the middle of summer. I think there will be kind of, if there's the evidence supports it, there'll be a desire to open up more water activities. We know it'll be hot. We know kids love water play. But for phase 1, there's really not, water and recreation, recreation is not sort of allowable purpose. And so that means no water play, no pools for kids in phase 1. Again, it's on the table for phase 2.
Can you comment on playgrounds?
Carrie, you want to take that one?
Sure, it helps to get off mute. I apologize. So I think, for playground care, it's just, wanting to make sure that all the equipment is wiped down, and again, making sure that we have the distancing aspect, and ensuring that, I think the sanitation piece is just what we want to stress with whether they're outside, because we know, when you get kids together outside, they're going to be a lot of challenges, but just making sure that there are appropriate sanitation and infection control processes that are being followed, wiping down all that equipment and those types of things.
Thank you. Now, there are many, many questions about mask wearing practices, and not just about, expectation for 2-year-olds, but is it recommended that all staff wear masks? Any recommendations about the cleaning of masks? Who is responsible for that, et cetera?
Well, I think those are going to have to be some individual policies and some things that are going to have to be looked at on a individual basis. I think maybe as I'm thinking about, working through this, that may be some guidance that would be good to have in terms of an FAQ. But I think that the individual programs are going to have to come up with some guidelines for what the expectation is. Is the expectation that they have clean masks every day and they go home with the family and they, wash those? Or, I think different programs have different limitations and capabilities. I mean, some places may be able to do them on site, but I think it's just going to have to depend on the program, and it's going to have to be very specific as folks start to come back and as we see the changes for implementing, the program start to open up a bit more. So I think that's going to have to be an individual call for each program and each center.
I just see in the questions that it seems that folks are trying to understand what may be requirements, by DSS or the health department for operation, and then also what are kind of best practice that, are there resources from the CDC or World Health Organization that they could post for parents. They have questions for things like, should we make masks mandatory for parents and siblings to have on at pickup and drop off? Just a lot of questions around best practice for masks. And so it's helpful, I think, for them to understand from you what they might expect to get specific guidelines or requirements on from you all, and where they should be looking to, national, best practice guidance out of national organizations that they may be able to post in their facilities for parents.
Yeah, I think we understand the difficulty in trying to police something like this. And so when you have, parents coming in with other children, and there's the pick up and drop off. I think that you can, request that the masks be worn, but we understand that policing is of something like that is very difficult. And I think to Jenna's point, where she was discussing earlier, we don't want to be punitive in some of the things that we're looking at from the point of DSS anyway. So there's a lot of different things out there that the CDC has issued some guidance on different things and best practices. And I know that those are relatively easy to find when you search on the CDC site. And that may be something that we try to incorporate in some of our FAQs as well. But I think those are just going to have to be things that you look at on an individual basis with best practices and try to communicate that as effectively as possible with your parents and, ahead of time when they're doing the drop-offs and pickups. But again, I know that's an extremely difficult thing to police.
I think it would be helpful, Tara, to have in an FAQ, because there are just many, many questions related to that. So I think, any advice or guidance, would be helpful for folks.
And I think one of the things that's good about having this type of forum is that we are able to see what a lot of the concerns are that we may not have anticipated, and we can try to help organize those into some thoughtful processes in terms of, implementing more FAQs or putting some more FAQs on our site. So we will definitely look at doing that so that
That's terrific.
Words out for folks.
Much appreciated. I also see a few questions about, any ideas or suggestions for getting supplies of PPE. Any good outlets or resources for getting those supplies?
Well, I know that we're seeing a lot. The PPE is definitely more accessible now than it was even maybe a week or a week 2 weeks ago. I know that there's not a whole lot of outlets for some of the folks if you don't have larger contracts or whatever, but literally places like Amazon are able to help. We have, again, I think I mentioned earlier with Child Care Aware, we have worked with them in order to get a little bit of a grant to be able to provide some stuff like PPE and cleaning supplies. So again, turn to Child Care Aware if you have an urgent need. And then, there are some other outlets, and I believe we may have some of that listed even in our FAQs in terms of some sites. I know, on the other side of the fence, we work a lot with VDM and securing stuff for our long-term care side, but we may, if folks are continuing to have a significant issue with finding things like that, let us know and we can see if there are other options. It's like I said, it's a better situation than it was a couple weeks ago. But if you're really having difficulty, you may want to shoot us an email at the CARES email that we have listed, and we can try to put you in touch with the right folks in order to have some access to the PPE.
Thank you. I think that would be helpful. Also, just in reviewing some of these questions, I see, kind of a difficult tension here between some who are asking and, sort of describing the financial challenges with keeping that up to 10 limitation for classrooms, as well as others asking, is it really safe to kind of go back to reopening? And so, Jenna, anything you want to just share about thought processes to take into consideration these different, the dynamics and different viewpoints?
Yeah, Kathy, that's a very good summary of what we're hearing on both sides. And so I think not having easy answers and incomplete information, I think, just want to be transparent with everybody in the audience that we are hearing strong feelings on both sides. We have folks who have been open for 10 weeks, who have instituted at a pretty significant cost to their business these health and safety protocols, and are providing an essential service to their communities, right, who have had not an incident and been able to keep their teachers safe, their kids safe, their families safe. On the flip side, I think as we all kind of watch the news and see the data and see things coming out of New York City and other places, right, it raises new questions about kids' health and safety. And so we don't have easy answers. I think, we recognize that no matter how you tackle this work, it's costly, right? It's costly to remain closed. It's extremely costly to stay open with smaller numbers. When we looked at the data and consulted with the Department of Health around phase 1, made the decision to stay at the kind of rule of 10, even though we know we have a handful of providers who, this makes it very difficult to operate or creates a disincentive to reopening until you can serve more kids. But that was what was safest based on the Virginia data, based on what we were learning from those 40% of programs that have remained open and have done an incredible job of keeping their kids safe and keeping their educators safe. And I think, the best way to kind of acknowledge this is we're going to continue to hear from the different sides. Our stakeholder calls will have a mix of health experts, kid advocates, and providers, right? The different interests at play here. We will hear out the recommendations. We will take them to our governor, who, as many of you know, is a pediatrician. We will, say, here's what we're hearing from the field. Here's what we think about health and safety. Here's what we think about cost impact. Here's what we think about the sort of true comprehensive picture of the kid, right? We know that isolated kids, that has cost too in terms of kids' mental health and overall well-being, and really present this to the governor with the full set of perspectives and then make the right decision for phase 2. And so those decisions aren't made today, largely because we want to hear from people and we want to kind of use the up-to-date data, as the cases go down and the testing goes up, so that we provide the right guidance and advice for phase 2. So phase 1 will not last forever. Phase 1 will represent a compromise, as phase 2 will, and we will keep health and safety at the forefront of all of our decisions, knowing that they're ultimately made by the governor, who's a pediatrician, and we're continuing to kind of balance through each stage all of those trade-offs you described, Kathy.
Thank you. I know that was a hard question, and just really see in all of the comments what a difficult thing that is for folks to balance. I think the remainder of the questions are, questions about, how can providers really, take the responsibility of meeting these health and safety guidelines and figure out how to do things like staggered arrivals or divided classrooms, really seeking to try to be good stewards and really follow the safety guidelines. And then also some, I think, really valid questions about the financial viability and feasibility of providing these services with the current sort of financing mechanisms that are in place. So just kind of wanted to state that in terms of the groupings of the remaining questions. I also see questions.
Kathy, I have
go ahead.
One thought for this group. Yeah, one thought for this. I mean, I think, as Tara noted, and I think we can take some of the guidance that's come from the federal government, from the CDC, and from our Virginia Department of Health, and answer some of these FAQs around the protocols. I still think it doesn't fully answer some of what folks are hinting at, is what are my colleagues doing? And I know that this can be an incredibly isolating time and almost more challenging right now, right, when you run a private program. So certainly, kind of, Kathy and Tara, it might be worth it to kind of go back. I've found it incredibly insightful to hear from programs that have been open and been doing this for the greater part of 2 months, right? And kind of walking through, here's how I've done those staggered entrants. Here's how I've had those conversations with the parent who wants to bring in the older sibling or, won't wear the mask. And so maybe there's an opportunity either in partnership with CCF or the Child Care Association, but to do some kind of maybe panel, and we can hear from some folks who are doing it. I think, rather you hear from providers. I don't think from the state perspective, we're not trying to sort of push anybody to put in place, any practices beyond what is sort of advised in the guidance. But I could see where it might be useful for us to convene some folks who are open, in different areas of the state, and just have a panel type where people can talk about what they've done, and that might help at least, provide a little bit more color and detail on how to think about, reopening or putting some of these practices in place in your own program.
Jen, it looks like that idea is finding favor with the participants, so we'll definitely look into finding ways to make that feasible. I think people are also asking questions about, how can they be part of conversations or part of, bringing insight to these discussions about, kind of successive phases and what is, what may happen there. So, you have a lot of eager and willing folks who are interested in being part of those conversations. So we'll figure out how to set up some webinars and discussions to make that possible. Thank you for that.
That'd be great.
Also, it looks like we have questions about, do we want to, and this again may be more for kind of sharing best practices among providers who are working through some of these challenges about, how do you divide classrooms or think about strategies for, staggering individuals or grouping families. I think we also are seeing some questions coming forward about when might it be possible for support personnel to come back into the classrooms, Virginia Quality or coaches. You all have any thoughts or insights about when that might be feasible?
That's a great question. I mean, I think about it in kind of two ways, and I'll just present the balancing act, because I would imagine that certainly won't happen in phase one and would be a possibility for phase two. I think there's a balancing act between, wanting to keep, limited contact within these groups, right? Protect health and safety. But also if there's a way, and if our teachers really would benefit from the supports, to be really thoughtful about that, right? And can you do this safely on a small scale if there are very clear kind of protocols around entrance of individuals? I think the same is true when you think about our children with special needs, and if the only way for them to get the therapeutic services they really need is by having somebody else come in, we're going to have to really look hard at that balancing act between wanting to limit contact, but also knowing how critically important those services are. So we'll revisit that question for phase two, and I think it will, I think we will not see like everybody allowed to come in, but potentially some guidance to centers on where there are cases where having somebody come in, sort of might be so important to that child's well-being or that educator's well-being that, there's a way to kind of mitigate the health and safety concerns. So really discouraging outside visitors, phase one. We'll look at it for phase two, but I don't think anybody should expect in phase two that you'd see a lot of visitors. It would be very selective in terms of who we would want to take that risk for.
Mm-hmm. And I see one of our participants also said under the CARES paperwork we signed, we agreed not to have visitors in the centers through the month of June. Awesome.
Yeah.
That's
an important note there, Kathy. I just want to, because I know Tara and I've gotten this before. The CARES Act guidance, what you signed off was a commitment to follow the rules of the state as they were, as they kind of are. So I do think, and Tara, we should go back and make sure we sort of dot all the I's and cross the T's here. But, if there's substantively different guidance for phase two and you're open in June, like you would be expected to follow the phase two guidance, right? So for instance, somebody asked us last time, if there's more flexibility on numbers and that goes into effect, for instance, on June 15th, just a for instance, please don't write that date down, that you would be allowed, even if you had signed that CARES Act commitment, to follow the more flexible guidance on June 15th. So again, the key piece to note is you have to follow the sort of health and safety kind of guidance of the day as related to COVID-19. And we can figure out, if the guidance changes, how to put something out, but don't want people to be really concerned that I signed off for the CARES piece, the guidance has changed, but because I signed this document in April, like I can't move to phase two. So we'll figure out how to communicate that effectively to everybody when when and if that occurs, but don't feel like you've locked into phase one guidance just because you're a recipient of the CARES grant. What we really want for you to do is to follow the guidance of the day, provided by the state as it relates to COVID-19.
Plenty of questions here about, wondering what is the best way for providers to express their concerns, thoughts, suggestions. Is there a platform, where this kind of input could be received? What's the best way to direct the feedback?
So certainly, I think you could email us. If it's easier to remember, you can also email early childhood at doe.virginia.gov. They've been sort of tracking the listening sessions, and so if you would like to send us an email, we have taken all emails very seriously. Tara and I have shared them. We've been elevating them, so we know folks have been reaching out, and so I'll ask maybe Valerie to put that in the chat function, but more than willing to to take emails about this, as and help us understand the context.
And Jenna, could you say there she got it. I also, think probably, it might be helpful to say that, I think it would be difficult for you all to commit to responding to everyone, but if folks could understand that you're receiving and incorporating all of the questions and feedback into your, decision making and sort of discussions, it might be helpful to clarify.
Yeah, Kathy, I think that, sorry, go ahead, Jenna.
Oh, I was just going to say, I think a part of what we'll do as we kind of come out with phase two is give people a sense of what we've heard too. So I think we can both, commit to reading everyone and also make sure to commit to kind of sharing what we've heard when we come out with the next phase of guidance.
Yeah, and I just wanted to remind folks that we, have a lot of these questions in regards to more like the phase one questions, since there wasn't a whole lot that changed, that if you go to our website, we have a lot of those FAQs already out there. We have worked very hard to try to keep a lot of that up to date. So there might be, some things that we haven't answered, and that will be what we work on, after we get off this call, because that's usually what we go to work doing as soon as we finish up one of these calls, is having our team start to look at the questions and draft answers for everybody and get those FAQs out. But if you go back to our website, there's still the FAQs are listed there, and that may help if you go back to that and read through some of those, give you an understanding of, even some of the issues and the distancing and the playgrounds and the cleaning and sanitizing and those types of things as well. So I just wanted to remind everybody about that.
Thank you. Do you all want to speak at all about, we have several questions about new licenses or new schools coming online, process for approving new.
So basically it works similar to the way it did prior to this pandemic, only I think that what we would like to say is it's a much more expedited process, and things should move relatively more quickly. Some things have been waived in terms of, we've had several, we requested leniency on several things in terms of our regulations, and we were granted that on some of the more onerous types of regs that we have. But you go to your local licensing office. We have 8 around the state. You can find those, on our website. For those who haven't been familiar with that, you contact your licensing office and work through that process with your local inspector and licensing administrator.
Thank you. There's some questions about testing. Should providers be tested? What, have y'all had any conversation about the role or the strategy of testing in terms of childcare?
So my experience has been, we've worked a lot with, the Department of Health, and having, we also license the adult side, and we're just now getting to the point where we're able to do testing for folks that have outbreaks. So it's still somewhat difficult, probably in terms of just a center to have testing done and have somebody come in to do that, unless you were to have what's considered an outbreak. And that just reminds me, one of the questions that popped up as well. We have been tracking the number of positives in our centers that are open, and they're a relatively low number. So I think that there's some comfort in that. I mean, we have definitely had some positive cases, but for the most part, I think that remains relatively low in numbers compared to the amount of centers that we have open. But there's always, there are local places that are testing now within, communities, and you see, and that would be, if you are considering having testing or whatever, that's probably the best way to get it at this point. Obviously, if there's huge concerns that you have maybe folks, quite a few folks who may be symptomatic, you definitely want to reach out to your health department, because they can, work with any type of testing that you may need. But there's a lot of places, just locally, and some of the 24-hour, like your Patient First and your Better Meds, they're offering a lot of the testing as well. So that's a couple options if that would be the route you would choose to go.
Thank you. Y'all want to weigh in on temperature taking upon entry?
So I think that's part of best practice, and that would be something that, I would recommend in terms of, a safety mechanism and best practice. Obviously, these are things that, you as an individual provider need to look at and determine what would be best. I think those are always highly recommended practices, and that, if you have that, you're probably going to really assist in mitigation of any type of risk. Obviously, you're not going to be completely free from it, but I think anything that you can put in place like that would be helpful.
Thank you. And we have a good number of questions about dividing classrooms into two groups. I think just, folks just trying to figure out how that works. You may want to defer that to a presentation where we hear from folks who are doing this successfully, but anything y'all want to share about this strategy of the division of classrooms into groups?
So again, I think a lot of this guidance we have in some of our FAQs that we have on our website, and people are, it's really interesting to hear what some folks are doing. I mean, I know Jenna has explained this so beautifully on other calls, and she probably could do it way better than I can, but folks are using a lot of different tactics in terms of, room dividers, like using bookshelves, and we have folks that are, just actually, using some of the cones and having, dividers up just to where they mark off distance, and using, a lot of different techniques just to make folks aware of where those boundaries are. I know in a couple places they've actually used the tables that they have in the like they have in their dining areas at school. If you can picture what I'm talking about, to use, in terms of dividing off those spaces. But Jenna, you have done such a great job of explaining that in the past. Do you have anything to add on that?
I think the key point, right, is that we recognize, similar to sort of the different settings which people operate, that this becomes, because you operate in such different physical spaces, right? And, we realize that we're not asking anybody to build walls, right? Again, this is guidance in phases, and none of this is permanent. And so we don't want to kind of put you in a place where you have to like turn down kids, or you have to, build something. And so the, key piece is, how do you keep the groups separate, right? And that, looks different, right? I mean, you could have potentially, sort of folks just barely 6 feet apart, and if they're non-mobile infants, that's, that's fine, right, in terms of the 2 spaces, right? I know that that's oftentimes your infant rooms are smaller, and kind of keeping those groups separate, for instance. It might, be that you're sort of in a large gym space with your school age kids, and you put tape on the floor, and you have some physical barrier, then you're monitoring it closely, and like you're keeping those groups separate. Like, again, Tara and the team will defer to that. So, I do think it is, a good thing, Kathy, to add to that panel, right? All the different ways that we're doing it. But I think the kind of key points are, how do you keep the groups from coming in contact with each other? And that nobody expects folks to make, physical infrastructure investments at this point in time. So it's about kind of being creative with the materials you have, thinking about how you use both sort of physical materials and you use staff to kind of keep groups separate. And again, knowing that like if a kid runs outside of the tape once, right, that we're not gonna take a punitive approach is really important, right? Again, we're just trying to kind of keep folks safe, and our folks have done it for about 10 weeks now, and have done it in a lot of different ways. So it could be really helpful to hear from them.
Thank you. Once again, the two of you have done an incredible job of answering many, many dozens of questions and doing that so well. It sounds like as we get to our 12:30 time limit, just want to mention that I think some of the kind of conclusions that we've come to in this webinar is you've offered lots of resources on the DSS site. You've offered an email on the DOE side for receipt of any kind of input or suggestions or questions that can be taken into consideration as plans are made for ongoing guidance and phases. I think we've also heard a request and committed to providing some kind of a presentation or webinar where we can hear from a panel of open operators who can share best practice about how to manage and navigate some of these challenging circumstances with creativity. And I think I just want to give you a chance, Jenna or Tara, to make any final comments before we let folks get on to their day and before we close out.
So one final thought for me, and I'll turn over to Tara. Again, deep appreciation for folks' resilience, for your persistence, and for your flexibility, and your being kind of adaptable as things go. My, sort of 2 last thoughts are, 1, phase 1 is not going to last forever. It is a short-term phase. The governor, when he's talked about it, although he can't commit to a specific date, talks about it in terms of weeks. So we understand that for some of you, it feels really unsustainable, and we hear that, and just, I think, these 10 weeks have gone faster and slower in many ways than we expected, and just know that we know this isn't forever. I think my second point is we also hear from those of you who continue to have real concerns about kids' safety. And so just to acknowledge that, we understand the economy needs to recover, but that is never the factor that decides, right? We are really kind of what we hold dear and what is sort of core to the governor's decision and how he communicates to the agencies is health and safety. But he does take into account kind of the whole kid in terms of knowing that extended isolation, knowing that kids not being able to access kind of peers and kind of therapeutic services and the whole array of things that kids have lost out on by things being closed also has a cost. And so just trying to balance between the Virginia data, what we know about what's occurring as relates to COVID-19, the best practices within the state and across the country, and then making these decisions in sort of small bits and pieces in phases so that we can continue to walk that tightrope of keeping our educators, our families, and our kids, right, even our youngest children, safe, while also knowing that as a society we need to recover and to sort of do that gradually and to support our families in an equitable and thoughtful manner.
Thank you, Jenna. I would just add to that one of the things we want to make sure that you hear from us is, and I guess we've said this over and over again as we've had these different calls throughout the last 10 weeks, is that these are unprecedented times and we're not expecting you guys to be experts at every stage of this game, and we understand how difficult this has been. And so we want you to understand we're a resource more than anything at this point. That's what we want you to utilize. I know from DSS to the governor's office, that's just what we are, trying to make sure that we put out there. We're here. We understand the difficulty that you guys are experiencing. We so appreciate the effort, and we understand this is emotional, that there's just a lot of different feelings that are going on out there, but we are here, to kind of help you walk through this. And we don't always have all the right answers either. So what we are committed to doing is trying to help you find those resources and answer those questions to the best of our ability, even if we're not able to do it on the call today. But we will work diligently to make sure we find those for you and get those out in a reasonable time to assist you as what we consider some of the most essential personnel out there. So I just wanted to say, a final thank you, and please reach out if there's anything we can do.
Thanks to both of you. Lots of appreciation for the two of you and the tightrope that you're walking as well. Thanks to everybody for spending some time with us today. We will be posting distributing the recording and the slides from today's webinar as always, and we'll look forward to additional times in the future when we can get together and talk about some of these issues. Tara, Jenna, thanks so much to you, and thanks to all the attendees, and y'all have a good rest of your day. Thank you.